Well, welcome everybody. This is another one of the Agri-Business Development Institute's webinar programs. And today we're going to talk about an extremely topical issue, which is my relationship with my bank. And I have with me Tanya Atkinson, who is formerly an agribusiness manager for quite some time, and also now works part-time with ABDI in, I guess, working through all elements of financial management, and in particular, the issue of banks and a range of other things to do with high-performing businesses. So Tanya, welcome once again.
Thanks, Gordon. Hi, everyone.
Okay, so let's just get started. And this webinar may well go for 30 to 40 minutes, and we're just going to do as we often do, which is go with the flow. So why this topic? Well, the Agribusiness Development Institute, focus is on creating high-performing, self-managing, saleable and profitable agribusinesses. And most people who are growing their businesses, and we're fresh from a workshop of a couple of days, where a number of our clients were looking at how they were going to actually expand their business. Fundamentally, the discussion is often about money. Where do I get money? How do I manage my money? And inevitably, the connection with a bank is a key element of this discussion. So that's why we felt that with Tanya's capability in understanding the bank system and working directly with clients to maximize their relationships with their bank, that this would be an extremely valuable topic. So here we all are. This is also part of the Beef Business Management Program, which ourselves, our company, the Meat and Livestock Australia's donor company, AgForce in Queensland, Department of Agriculture in Queensland and Crow Horworth nationally are all looking at in terms of a collaborative venture. And at the moment, we have some very highly subsidised programs going on for the beef industry. So I guess wanted to put a plug in for that particular program. So before we introduce Tanya, a couple of quick housekeeping matters. Those of you who attend our webinars regularly realise that we try to keep everything low tech, low bandwidth and so on, because we know people out there have access to minimal internet resources at times, and we are well aware that people are actually following us by phone and watching the PowerPoints at the same time. Two other pieces of housekeeping. There will be the capacity to answer questions, so in your little drop-down box on the top right-hand corner, wherever it is of your screen, if you're on the internet, you'll have the capability of typing in questions. All being well, we will answer those questions at the end, or if necessary, we will actually follow through and send you answers to those questions afterwards. One of the other pieces of housekeeping is that the reason we know these webinars are effective and the adjustments we make are because we get good feedback from participants who attend. So once again, when you complete this webinar, we'll actually ask you for your thoughts around the webinar, its concept, its content, and the way it was run. So we'd certainly appreciate it if you could give us that feedback. So Tanya, here we have a quick summary of you, your coaching role, your mentoring role, your role in the banking system, understanding intimately how the system actually works. And I'm also aware in our sort of working relationship with you that you're quite passionate about your clients and people that you work with getting the most out of the relationship with the bank. So is that a reasonable summary, or is there anything you'd like to add?
No, that's fairly reasonable summary. I guess to add to it, part of what I'm passionate about is not just assisting my clients, but actually educating them throughout the process so that they've got the knowledge and the know-how to deal with their bank and get the most out of that relationship, even if they choose not to work with me anymore for different reasons.
Okay, well, thanks, Tanya. And look, that really fundamentally is what our particular company's role is in the marketplace and what our passion is as well, which is to make sure that those people who are choosing to develop, then run a high-performing business have the best possible education there is. Yep, so absolutely. Speaking of that, yep, thanks. So adding to that, the context in which we operate, and those who listen to our webinars will know that we repeat this ad infinitum, and it's simply because we see our role as being complementing people's understanding of their production knowledge. And our research over time and our experience over the last few years is that people feel actually confronted about the business side of things, or they know that there's much more to learn, or they want to engage with like-minded people, or they want to get specialist input. And so these 12 pillars are what guide our thinking. So in terms of money and in terms of banks, let's just run through these pillars. Very important when we're thinking about where we're taking our business to work out who it is we can collaborate with. Inevitably, understanding the financial side of things and banks as a potential partner or investors as a potential partner in this process is really quite critical. So we see the bank relationship as being important to it. People we've been working with over the last couple of days are all looking at their marketplace quite critically, looking to understand their customers in more detail. Many of them are looking to change what they do because they see niche and commodity market opportunities that they don't currently service. So inevitably, money is required to change what we're doing, and there's an element of risk in that process. Part of our pillar 3, which is thinking and acting in a corporate manner, is thinking and acting like, or thinking like and understanding the mindset of the people that we work with and are critical to our business growth. Once again, banks fit that picture. Logically, that fits with management accounting, management and operations, governance, internal business controls, around finance, around people, and around systems. And fundamentally, part of this discussion is around a systematic approach to thinking about our relationship with banks, which we'll propose in a minute, as a partner, which deals with the next slide, pillar 7, mitigating risk, and understanding pillar 8, our legal obligations to those that we collaborate with or who are what we call stakeholders in the approach. Pillar 9, we've called succession, but it's about business growth and transition in my book. So if we're going to grow our business, if we're going to transition out, banks are going to be a partner or a very interested party in that process. And so we've got to think about them as one of the critical friends or critical others in the process. Evaluating leverage and alliances is more about collaboration. Sales and marketing is about how to engage with our customers, but it's also selling ourselves at really a fundamental business level to those we work with. And once again, yesterday we dealt with the concept of positioning, how we position ourselves and our business in the marketplace. How do other people view us? And inevitably, if a bank is a critical part of that process, what we want is for the banks to view us in the right light, which inevitably comes back to that final pillar to do with communication. So Tanya, we elected to start, and we elected to go back to first principles, which is to ask ourselves how it is that we can, I guess, build this bank relationship. And I can hear some people saying, well, look, isn't it that we kind of walk down the street and go to the bank and there's a deal and we have the opportunity to play around the edges, but the deal is the deal sort of thing. Furthermore, the notion of like a partnership where the bank sort of takes a serious interest in what we're doing and probably a more proactive interest, that seems to be potentially a foreign concept, or is it? So I guess I'm interested in why it is that this slide is here and what you're getting at with this notion of a partnership.
Yep. So the partnership thing just comes back to, I think you touched on earlier, that mindset piece. So if you think about our relationship with our banks, particularly if we're in any sort of business, is normally a lifelong relationship. And if we think about our successful relationships in life, normally they're a two-way street. There's give and there's take. And if we think about the relationships that didn't work out so well, normally that's because one party was doing all the giving and the other party was doing all the taking. So this proposition comes from that angle, that if we work with the bank and understand what they need, why, and we're on the front foot with it, then there's benefits and rewards to us then as the client, because the bank sees that, recognises it, and should actually reward it through rates and those sort of things that are applied.
Okay, good. So I'm presuming then that you have a very strong proposition that there should be give and take in the relationship within the framework that the relationship is set up.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
And this,
and then
this
yes,
basis,
you go on.
This just forms the basis for that partnership, for the give and take.
Okay, great. So I guess the last sentence on that slide, which is about why each partner does what they do, is quite critical. Is that your proposition?
Yep. So, and again, that's from both sides. Once we as a customer understand why the bank's asking for information and what they need and by when, if we can be proactive with that, it also allows the bank or the bank manager to understand more fully what we're doing and where we're heading with our business or agribusiness, and what they need to be doing to assist us.
Okay. So let's move along. And before we get onto the agenda, you've actually put this quote in here. What was your motivation in doing so?
So this quote I love for many, many reasons, but it comes back to that mindset piece. So when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So if we talk about the glass half full, some people will look at that and see a glass half full, others will look at it and see a glass half empty, yet it's got the same amount of liquid in the same glass. It's all about the mindset that we're looking at things in can essentially alter the outcome.
Okay, so that's a really good entree into our agenda. So your proposition, and I guess the proposition behind this whole discussion, is for us to make sure this partnership works. Our objective is to look at it in a proactive sense around some key first principles. And I guess the reason we put the first principles in there is that we might be going to spend another half an hour or so talking about all this, but my view is, from what you've told me, that there's a whole lot more after we scratch the surface in this webinar that we'll need to probably dig into. Is that the case?
Yeah, it seems, in my experience, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Once people start understanding this, then there's a whole lot more that they're looking to get a better understanding of.
Okay, so if I can just put this in a context terms before we move into each of these things individually. My understanding is then that we're looking at customer margin as being a critical piece of currency of the discussion between us and the bank as part of our partnership. We're seeing that there's 3 C's that you'll explain to us, which actually help develop this customer margin and develop the relationship. And your proposition is that it's critical to be proactive and find out what you don't know. Would that be the case?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so let's move on to the slide about the customer margin. So I guess we've put question marks there because we're asking the question, do people actually understand this thing called customer margin? Do they understand how it's created? Do they understand what a difference it makes to rates, rates that are being charged, maybe relationship type issues, and so on? So can you just give us some context about what this customer margin thing is and how it works, and I guess how the 3 C's fit within that framework?
So to go back to your earlier question, most people know that they have a customer margin, so anyone that's got business or agri-finance. Very few people actually have ever been told or had it explained as to how that customer margin is set. So when you're talking about home loans, there's set interest rates that apply to each home loan. It's got nothing to do with the risk profile of the customer. When you're talking about business or agribusiness lending, everyone has the same base rate, and then they'll work out a risk profile on that customer and that business. That is, how likely or unlikely is it that their loans won't be repaid. And that's essentially how that customer margin is set. So that's applied on top of your base rate, which is why people pay different interest rates to perhaps their neighbour or their cousin or the person up the road.
Okay, so you've put here in simplistic terms how likely you are to be able to repay your loans. Is there anything more to it than that?
Not really. It's what it all boils down to is the risk associated with it. How likely or unlikely is it that you won't repay your loans to the bank?
Okay, so why is it that these 3 C's are so critical?
They form the basis of your risk profile as such. And this is uniform across any bank or union or credit union, those sorts of things, is there's 3 C's: character, collateral, and cash flow. They're deemed to be the basic 3 elements that combined together give the best indication of whether or not the bank's likely to get its loan repaid.
Okay.
Hence the risk.
Got you. So, what's the, I suppose, the proportion between them all? As in, is there, we'll call it a 30% loading on cash flow, 30% on collateral, and 30% on character? Is it that simple?
No, unfortunately, it's not that simple. Look, as a lender or anyone that's getting taught how to lend, character is, you're told that character is certainly the most important, and I know that it is with me when I'm assessing what clients I'll take on. I imagine some of our listeners the same thing. You don't give credit to people if you know that they owe money to other people around town. But at the end of the day, we're in a fairly slow lending environment, so unfortunately cash flow and collateral probably have a bit more weighting on them when a bank's looking at something. For private investment, I think they're more evenly weighted. They certainly do look at character as equally as they do the other 2.
So there's actually a question that's come in which probably fits with all of this before we move on, and that's relating to level of risk and at the same time discussion around level of competition and the extent to which that causes these 3 C's or the customer margin or whatever to be adjusted. Would you like to take that question or deal with that at this conceptual level, or
I'm happy to take it now. So that level of competition would actually be assessed when the cash flow side of it's being assessed, because that's a potential risk or obstacle to you continuing to generate the cash flow that you perhaps are at the moment.
Okay. Righty. Well, look, we'll maybe just keep that in mind as we dig down, because I'm conscious that time is marching on, so we better just progress. So the first C was about cash flow, and we've got this term in here of primary exit. And you've talked about a range of things to do with existing businesses and looking at historic financials, and our proposition would be, when we're looking at finance, we often think of it, well, cash flow, we're often thinking up from the point of view of management, of managing our money. Equally, you're proposing that cash flow projections are quite critical when it comes to relationships with banks. So maybe if you could just explain the primary exit concept, and then a bit more about the whole cash flow scenario from a bank's point of view.
Yep. So primary exit is from the bank's point of view. So whenever they approve any lending, they've got to be able to cover off on how they expected that loan to be repaid. And the first and preferable way that happens is through cash flow that's generated from the business itself, hence the primary exit. The cash flow that you use for your management purposes as a high-performing business is no different to the one that you would use when you go and speak to the bank. Although I do recommend people have a conservative one for the bank and perhaps an aspirational one that they're using in their business. But essentially it's all about identifying when the money's coming in and when it's going out, because that helps you and your bank manager work out what sort of lending facility and what that limit needs to be to fund the day-to-day requirements of your business.
Okay. So one of the other things that we deal with in the programs around cash flow and so on is being quite proactive in managing our cash flow. To the extent we talk about monthly board meetings and things like that, we talk about quarterly reviews with accountants to look back and then look forward. So I'm presuming if you're up to date with that sort of notion, that's going to help you in at least in your thinking with the bank, or if you need to go with a degree of urgency to the bank because an opportunity has presented itself. And is that sort of more proactive approach going to be helpful when considering cash flow from the bank's perspective?
Absolutely, because well, it shows that there's a a certain level of business acumen there, which goes towards your character and your ability to manage a business effectively. And B, it means that it's an accurate projection, because it's something that you've already worked on and thought about. Whereas quite often, if you don't work normally with a projection or a cash flow budget, it's something that's done last minute at the bank, and perhaps, and you're signing off on that as well. And perhaps in retrospect, there's been circumstances where people have sort of had the time then to look at it and go, well, actually, hang on, that's not quite right. That would never have happened. So if you've already got one, you're working on it, and you bring it in, then what you're signing off on is something that you definitely agree to.
Yep. So, and I recall yesterday we talked a little bit about doing some calculations in the workshop program, and I think what you were proposing there is if people actually take an orderly and structured approach to working things out, not only does it give them a better handle on it, but actually gives them a higher level of confidence about where they're going with their business, and if they do indeed need to talk to the bank, doing it in a much more proactive fashion. Was that the rationale?
Yep, and it just allows you then at any given point in time to really know what your financial position is within the business.
So
and identify if anything's gone wrong.
Okay. So at the bottom, we've talked about other critical factors around cash flow. Could you just briefly elaborate on are there any other sort of shades of grey around this whole concept that we need to know about?
No, so the main things with cash flow are that it's a conservative cash flow. The income is conservative. The expenses are perhaps slightly overinflated, just to make sure that you've accounted for anything that may go wrong. And then the thing that the bank's looking at, and you should be looking at as well, is whether there's a cash surplus at the end of that 12 months or a shortfall. So obviously if it's a surplus, we're in the black, and we're saying that there's enough cash flow there generated to actually repay all the loan commitments, operating expenses, living expenses, and there's still a bit left over. So if something goes wrong, there's a bit of a buffer there that you would actually be able to fund that out of your own cash flow. The other part of it is that if the cash flow projection shows a shortfall at the end of the 12 months, so it's essentially in the red, which is quite normal, particularly for a startup, or if there's significant changes being made to the operation, then you just need to be able to explain and understand why there's a shortfall for that first 12 months. And quite often in that circumstance, it's worthwhile doing a second year projection so that the benefit can actually be seen of whatever you're looking to achieve in that first year when the profits do start coming in, or when you are starting to generate a surplus.
Okay, good.
Well, the main thing around the cash flow is that you can quantify the figures you've got in there. As long as you can explain and quantify where they've come from.
Okay, so we don't want smoke and mirrors, and we don't just want back of the well, not so much back of the envelope stuff, but just things that you kind of thought up at the time.
No, because that essentially goes against your credibility then. If things don't go to plan and you can't stand by those figures that you initially put down there, then that affects your credibility.
Okay, which I know we're going to get onto our third C in a few minutes, character. So that's all part and parcel of the third C, which is maintaining a high level of credibility and, I suppose, communication.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, well, I'm thinking that we'll move on then to our second C, which is collateral. And so we've actually called that second exit. So I was a bit intrigued when you put that down. So could you just run us through what the second exit concept is all about?
Yep, so the secondary exit, again, this is from the bank's perspective. So we spoke about their first and preferred method of having their loans repaid is a primary exit, and that's through cash flow generated from your business or farm income, whatever it might be. The next exit strategy that they'll evaluate, that secondary exit, is normally through collateral. So it's the security that they have against those loans. Now, obviously, this isn't a bank's preferred method to recoup those loans, but it is certainly part of the process and part of their due diligence that they have to do and have to be able to confirm they've done, so that if that cash flow generated failed or dried up, and look, competition may be one of the reasons that it did, then what's their secondary exit? How do they get that loan repaid? Or how do they give you some more funding if it's just a timing issue, and some more funding will actually get you through because we've had unfortunate weather seasons and failed crops and things like that. Is there equity there that they can fund you through until things pick up again?
So some of us might think, oh, well, that's actually thinking about capacity to sell us up. But on the other hand, it might actually be a proactive approach, which is to demonstrate there's a sufficient buffer there in the case of things going a tad pear-shaped, which they can do in agriculture. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I still remember one of the senior managers I got taught by a long, long time ago telling me that if you lent right up to the equity value, it was like giving them a letter of offer in one hand and a forbearance in the other hand. So basically, if they're lending you money and they've got no ability to lend you anymore if things get tough, then they're not really doing the right thing by you from the start.
So I'm imagining that one of the take-home messages out of this whole process is that they're kind of understanding human nature, and they're understanding that often we need a buffer, particularly in agriculture. There's all these unforeseen circumstances, so they're just taking an extremely conservative approach. Would that be right?
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it.
Okay.
Yep.
Is there another way of looking at it, Tanya?
Well, I guess at the end of the day, they're a business as well. So
yep.
They've got to ensure, same as we do, if we're selling any of our products to someone else, we need to make sure that client we're selling to is going to be able to repay us and assess where that repayment's coming from.
Okay, great.
So there's two ways they look at it.
Okay, so let's now move on to character, because once again, this is one of the things that we often deal with in our programs, and we're in a very fortunate position of having people who are very interested in being proactive in growing their business, and they're taking quite an orderly approach to what they're doing. So this kind of resonated with me when I saw the third C. So I guess this is actually about the people who are running the business, like the business owners, as I see it. And it maybe, is it even about people who are lurking in the background who have an influence on how the business runs?
That gets taken into account when they're assessing the overall strength of the business, certainly, but they're not normally the borrowers or the guarantors, other people in the business. So this refers mainly to the people that are actually the borrowers or the guarantors of any borrowings.
And the assumption is that they've therefore got a stake in what's going on. So you kind of, the bank is actually buying their ability to do what they say they are going to do, and their capacity and capability to run, one would hope, a high-performing business.
Yep.
So could you just take us through these things then, and just, I guess, explain a bit more about what this is all about and how it actually sits in bank decision making?
Yep. So obviously the first two C's we spoke about, there's hard data to be able to support and evaluate that. So this one, whilst it's just as important, is a subjective one. It's a bit harder to prove, but essentially it comes down to whether or not they can trust you as a person to do what you say you're going to do. You know, are you honest? Are you reliable? Do you pay your bills on time? Is your overdraft always over its limit? This is a topic to go into for another day, but you know, there's always circumstances where we perhaps need to go over our overdraft for short periods of time. Have we actually run the bank and got a temporary excess approval in place for that? If we say we're going to do something, do we actually execute on it? There's obviously things that are outside of our control quite often. I don't know about you, but I hear Mother Nature's not the most well-behaved partner in our businesses. But it's taking responsibility for those decisions which we did have control over, and evaluating if something didn't work last year, this is what we're going to do this year going forward. Your lending history with the bank, you know, have you repaid your loans on time? your credit score and your credit history, which anyone can get a hold of. We're legally entitled to request a copy of that every 12 months. That's something I recommend people to do. It's always interesting to see what's on there and make sure that there's nothing incorrectly on there.
Okay.
It also comes down to your experience within the industry and what you're doing as well, and how you're regarded within the industry. We all know that as farmers, you're the best person on the ground to know who farms whatever it is. So if we're talking about graziers, then who are the best producers? If we're talking about cane farmers, then who gets the best tonnage and the highest sugar yields? And
Okay.
probably the most important one with this one, Gordon, and a misconception I really want to clear up is, does your bank manager actually know who you are? So I quite often get comments from people saying that it's great, the bank doesn't contact them, so they're not in trouble and it works well. And that's fine, but if you ever do get into a tight spot or something happens and you need your bank to go in and bat for you, if you're looking for something that's outside their normal sort of comfort zone for either security or cash flow, those sorts of things, you want your bank manager to know who you are. You want them to know what sort of person you are and how you run your business or your farm, and that you do execute on what you say you're going to do, and that you have got business acumen. So if you don't know your bank manager, can I ask you, if nothing else from this today, can you give them a ring and make sure they come out and visit you, or you drop in for a coffee or tea when you're in town next time, so that they know who you are in case things ever do get a bit tight. They can go into bat for you and have faith in the person that they're fighting for.
So in essence, you're advocating very strongly building a personal relationship, and even though we might get frustrated somewhat with turnover and that sort of thing of personnel, it's just one of those things that a high-performing business operator or owner does do, which is to say this is actually a critical element of building relationships around my business. Have I got that right?
Absolutely. It's like any other stakeholder in your business, and whether we like it or not, the bank is a huge stakeholder in our business. There's very few of us that could actually open our doors if we didn't have some sort of funding from the bank.
Okay.
So we need that stakeholder to know who we are, and we need to know who they are as well.
Okay. Well, look, let's move on because I notice time is marching on. So the third item on our agenda is the notion of being proactive. So I guess now that we understand those first principles, you've got a little proposition here that that people actually can make almost like a self-assessment of how they sit, and if they're kind of their own personal scorecard is not quite what they would like, then that will actually help them understand what they need to do differently to kind of shore up that relationship with the bank manager. So is that what your thinking is here?
Yes, absolutely. As a start, go through what we've got here for those 3 C's, apply it to your business. What is your equity position like? What's your cash flow situation like? Are you well regarded within your industry and you've always repaid your loans on time and those sorts of things? And if you've never asked the question to your bank manager and you tick the 3 C's or majority of them, then just ask how your customer margin compares for your risk profile. If you're quite comfortable that you have ticked the 3 C's and you've never questioned rates and those sorts of things, and it's definitely worth just asking that question. If the answer is that you're not in a position yet to get it reduced, then find out what those hurdles or benchmarks are. What do you need to do to be in a position in 12 months' time or whatever it might be to look at a customer margin reduction?
Okay. Sounds good. So that's about building the relationships, but you've got some more thoughts about other tasks that need to be undertaken. Pardon me, I'm just making sure we go to the next slide, which was about being proactive. So here you have actually 4 things that you're proposing that people ought to do. So maybe take us through those, Tanya.
So quite often I get asked, what do I need to take to the bank? And look, depending on the deal and the individual circumstances, there'll be other things in addition to this that you'll require, but these are probably the the four basics that a bank's always going to want: statement of position and financials, cash flow projections. But if you've got your business plan and an effective business plan, you've done a SWOT analysis, that straight away shows a level of business acumen and goes a long way with that character tick for the 3 C's. When we're talking about a business plan, there's a lot of us that have a business plan, but it doesn't actually go into how they're going to execute that. And unfortunately, I don't believe a business plan means anything without having the execution plan contained inside of it. So that should cover the next 6 to 12 months at least, where we've actually mapped out what we need to do, what the smart actions are on a timeline required. But then we've also got our goals or our vision for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years contained with that. The SWOT analysis, sorry.
I was going to say, if I can put it to you in I guess, summary terms about item 1, it's about the grand plan. It's a grand plan as expected over the next 3 to 5 to 10, 15 years, whatever else it may be. And then it's drilling down into, okay, so over 12 months to maybe 24 months, so 1 to 3 years, let's say, getting quite specific about what the plan is in terms of the intention, but also then how specifically we intend to put that into place. Is that what you're talking about with the execution plan?
Yeah, so normally 6 to 12 months is, look, if you can do the next 2 years, great. I think it's hard to get too specific beyond 12 months. But so as a minimum, I say 6 to 12 months. You should actually have a timeline in there, and each month have mapped out when those actions that you've identified need to happen in order to achieve what you've set out to achieve within that 6 to 12 month time frame. And then you just update that as you're checking in at your monthly board meetings or your quarterly board meetings that you're having. Okay.
So I guess yesterday also we went through this whole SWOT analysis. So you actually gave people who were there at the workshop some techniques to do that. But like if we create a bit of a mind picture here about the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, is there anything that people need to understand about like doing that, or is there a little kind of word picture you can create to help people do it in their minds?
Essentially, so SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, and this is normally contained within your business plan. However, I think it's so important that it's done properly that I actually list it separately. The most important thing is to be honest with it. So your strengths is, what is your unfair advantage? What do you do really well that other people don't, or what differentiates you from your competition? Weaknesses, what do you not do well and what do you struggle at? And everyone has weaknesses, so it's important to identify what those are. The opportunities are just often come from how we can improve on our weaknesses, how we can leverage our strengths better, or perhaps other opportunities in the marketplace that we can capitalise on. And threats are essentially any obstacles or hurdles that could get in the way of us achieving that or leveraging our strengths and improving our weaknesses.
Okay.
I'd recommend with this, so whilst it's done in your business plan on your business, I really recommend doing your SWOT analysis initially on you personally, because it can be quite an eye-opener, but it also then makes it a lot easier to do the SWOT analysis on your business.
Okay. So we've been into this for 40 minutes now, so I'm thinking we're getting close to wrapping it up in any case. So I'm thinking that we've probably covered off the statement of position and financials and cash flow projections, have we, Tanya?
Yep.
Okay. Well, look, I guess if we move on to the completion of this webinar. So firstly, I'd like to thank you very much, Tanya, for once again contributing to what we're doing in this program. And I guess reminding everybody that Tanya, for example, is one of the external specialists that we have that come into our program and actually do work with our clients in the agribusiness development programs, or in this case the beef business management program for the beef industry. And what we're doing is I guess, as we've described today, which is people who are in the program the last couple of days, which I've been referring to several times, we've actually asked them and give them the tools to go and do this kind of assessment of how they might interact with their bank manager, then to actually put themselves in the bank manager's shoes, put themselves in the bank corporate shoes. And then we've had a range of discussions with other people who are in the program to find out how they've developed those sort of relationships with a bank, as an example. And so that actually fits with, as I said, those 12 pillars at the very beginning, which is inevitably money's what makes the whole thing go round. Inevitably, if we've got a painful relationship with our bank, it's going to give us angst and I guess emotional concern. If we have a sound relationship with our bank, as we might with our customer and others in the marketplace, then it's actually a sleep at night factor that I think is quite important. So that's the reason why we feel so strongly about programs like this, being able to help people think about doing business better. So Tanya, anything to wrap this up before we just give people, you know, some contact points and things like that?
No, I think that probably covers off on most of it. We get into the meat in the course again next week, I suppose.
Yep, that's very true. Okay, so look, I'd like to thank you once again for joining us, Tanya. If anyone would like a bit of information about what we're doing, and they can certainly make contact with us through email, through the website, and through phone numbers, or direct contact with AgForce or DAF. So Tanya, you know, would you like to give people your mobile number? We haven't got it written down here, but I'm happy for you to just give it to them.
Yep. So if anyone wants to get in touch with me to discuss that further, or I'm 0427 053 653, and Unique Management's on the front of that slide, so you can find me in LinkedIn or Facebook as well.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for joining us then, Tanya. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Gordon. Thanks everyone for dialing in and listening.
Great. And of course, the final slide is, you know, we do our best endeavours to provide this sort of information to you. At the same time, it's often important that you, in this case, go directly and talk to your bank manager. Now, hopefully, you're forearmed. And so as you click off, you'll get that feedback process. So we'd very much like to get some comments back from you. And actually, I just checking our question box. So somebody said, thank you very much. So you, Greg, likewise, we appreciate your involvement as well. And I think we covered off our other questions. So thanks very much for joining us, Tanya, and thanks everyone for joining us as well. Bye for now.
Thanks, Gordon. Thanks, everyone.